Okay, Eli Forrester. Eli Forrester is a sustainability consultant and entrepreneur with over a decade of experience leading climate and decarbonization initiatives across corporate, academic, and global development sectors. He founded Volta, a solar company in West Africa that delivered more than 400 renewable energy installations for hospitals, farms, and schools. Eli has advised startups, Fortune 500 companies, and international aid organizations on sustainability strategy, circular economy, and business model innovation. He holds a dual MBA MS in sustainable enterprise from the University of Michigan and a BA in environmental science from the Evergreen State College. Woohoo! And turn it over to you, Eli.
All right. So, hey, everybody. I'm Eli Forrester. I'm thrilled to be speaking with you today at Evergreen, where my own journey into sustainability began. I'm a proud GUI duck from the class of 2011, where I majored in sustainable development and environmental science. I'm thrilled to be back on campus virtually today, and excited to share a bit about my career and as a sustainability consultant. Today's talk is changing your company from the inside out. Before I dive in, I'll briefly introduce myself. I did my undergrad in beautiful Olympia, Washington. I did grad school at the University of Michigan, at the Urban Institute for Sustainable Enterprise, an awesome program, which is a dual school of environment and the School of Business. Afterwards, I've worked in a few different places. The ones relevant to today's talk are listed here, which are Steelcase, my own company, Volta, Kraft Heinz, and DuPont. Outside of work and school, I love to cook. I love to travel and see live music. This last picture here is actually one of my best evergreen buds and me at the Gorge in Eastern Washington. Okay, so here's what we'll cover today. First, we'll talk about what a tempered radical is and why it matters. We'll talk a little bit about my own path, from founding a solar company in West Africa to working inside of Fortune 500 corporations, my theory and understanding of change. We'll talk a little bit about the unofficial tempered radical toolkit for strategies for driving impact from within systems and organizations, especially ones that don't always share your values. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about reflection on how you can design a purpose. So, okay, I just want to give a little intro matters now, specifically for Evergreeners. So, if I say anything today that doesn't make sense, or I mention a term or acronym that should have been defined better, please just pause me. There might be a few things I throw out. Just want to make sure we're together on this. So, we're living through a time when climate action, sustainability, and justice feel urgent, possibly overwhelming, and certainly overdue. This is Evergreen. You're all familiar with some of the traditional forms of activism. If you are likely activists, you're other. And today I want to talk a little bit about and even advocate for another form of activism that may be new for some of us. It's a more subtle flavor of activism. Um, some of you may be thinking like climate change is different. We need to act fast. We need to act big. Subtle activism doesn't needs, and that's fair. But with the problem is climate change, I'd argue that this type of problem needs all sorts of change. So you've probably also felt frustrated by how slow institutions can move and how businesses often prioritize profit over purpose and people. And that's where today's conversation really comes in. This is another way to think about activism, one that doesn't take place necessarily in the streets, but in conference rooms, in laboratories, in break rooms, and in board. Myerson calls being a tempered radical. So what does that mean? Tempered radicals are people who work not outside of them to push for change. They often play the long game. Tempered radicals may not be revolutionaries, but they quietly challenge small acts through building coalitions and creating momentum from within. Before I go further, I'll just quickly catch folks up on the reading, which was Denver Meyerson's article, The Tempered Radicals. Meyerson studied people inside of big organizations who wanted to create change, but didn't have or the appetite for full-on rebellion. And she coined them tempered radicals. These are insiders who care deeply about social and environmental issues, but play within the system, whether that's a corporate system, a government system, it's where they're at. And instead of resistance or act, push from the inside, all persistently and strategically. She opens the article by sharing stories like Barbara Was at Hewlett Packard or HP back in the 80s. When HP canceled her sustainability conference, she reframed it as a customer visit and ran it anyway. And so in the article, Deborah describes four main strategies for how tempered radicals work successfully. The first is she talks about small wins, which is starting with actions that build confidence and legitimacy. She talks about, which is finding ways to challenge norms, getting potential allies. She talks about credibility, earning trust by delivering excellence who share your values, and amplifying to build circles of influence. Tempered radicals operate on a fault line, usually between personal values and institutional work is that they're bending systems rather than breaking them. And Deborah's bottom line really is that lasting change inside institutions doesn't always come from it often comes from people who are bold enough to stay, who are patient enough to adapt, nudging little by little. Okay, so I just want to break down those four main strategies real quickly, and again, just jump in if you have a question on these. So in the article, Meyerson said small wins are powerful because they're doable. Small wins give us something to grab onto right now, rather than waiting for perfect conditions, which may come later or not at all. You can think of small wins as kind of like a sustainability snowball. Start with for a data dashboard, something modest. And I think once people see progress, conversations begin to shift. Curiosity spreads, and these are the humble roots of how culture change begins. So small wins, they're doable. They build momentum and morale, demonstrate new norms. Quiet resistance. This is one of my favorite parts of Meyerson's work. This is the art as quo without making people feel, which is a really important balance. So tempered radicals don't always lead protests, smaller signals. This can be the questions you ask in meetings, not to laugh at when someone makes an off-color joke. Meyerson calls this disruptive self-expression. It's how we live our values. Think back to Barbara at HP. Ability decades before it was mainstream. And when H-Prince, she didn't fight the order. She reframed it. The same people showed up, the same content was shared, and suddenly sustainability case. Customers were interested. That's what Deborah calls just enough to keep doors open. She says that quiet resistance is about persistence disguised as professionalism. It's subtle, it's radar just long enough to plant roots. So quiet resistance allows you to question norms. It allows you to practice disruptive self-expression and achieve sustained influence. Another one of her strategies is around credibility from within, which is the idea that your first act of leadership is simply doing great work. If you walk into a new organization and you're the new person and immediately start, you'll likely get tuned out or worse. But by building a track record of reliability, people will for your opinion, and that's where some of this work really begins. Being a tempered radical doesn't mean downing the credibility to advance them. So when you're starting out, whether in a company or a nonprofit or a government agency, think of credibility as one of your most valuable currencies, fund real transformation. Okay, fourth and final strategy is coalition building. No one changes a system alone. Meyerson tells the story of Barbara again here after realizing that sustainability advocates inside brought them together. She called it um, pulling together all the a strong signal. And that's what coalition building also keeps you sane. Deborah wrote, "You can't keep sane on your own." And this is true. Working for change inside complex organizations can feel lonely. Finding a few busy for wanting things to be better. So the takeaway here is that relationships are your infrastructure. Build them before you need them. When the moment for I became a tempered radical. So I want to give you a quick snapshot of my own path. Here's just sort of a very oversimplified timeline since I graduated from Evergreen, and I'll talk a little bit about how my theory of change sort of evolved. So I really started on the outside as a founder. I built a solar company in West Africa with the goal to expand clean energy access in places that didn't have reliable power. And then I moved sort of to the inside, joining Steelcase, which is a century-old furniture manufacturer with circular design and entrepreneurship. Next up came DuPont, where I learned some hard lessons I'll talk about in a minute about institutional inertia and some of the limits of change in legacy systems. And then Kraft Heinz, where I led sustainability strategies of global suppliers and began to embed carbon and equity goals directly into procurement. And then most recently, I've joined Recology, which is a San Francisco-based waste management company where I lead the sustainability programs, focusing mostly on zero waste and circular economy around the West Coast. So each one of these steps taught me something different about where and how change happens, and together they out these places. Because that's kind of where this story begins. In 2015, a friend and I co-founded Volta, a solar company based in West Africa in Ghana. And our mission was reliable, affordable power to places that needed it most. These are health clinics, farms, schools, small businesses on diesel generators or had no power at all. On the ground frustration. My co-founder, Mahama, he was from Ghana, and he grew up seeing these health clinics trying to refrigerate vaccines using, sketchy gasoline generators that broke down, or farmers losing harvests because they couldn't run irrigation pumps. We knew that solar was reliable and cost effective enough to change some of that. So we started small, just a single install with that very first installation. And we handled everything, the financing, the engineering, the bizarre logistics of getting panels through the customs bureaucracy in Ghana. And, I'll be like totally honest here. We had no time. I had never touched a solar panel. Um, didn't know anything about electrical engineering, but we were driven to learn, we were driven to make this work. That first project did miraculously produce electricity clinic. And the health clinic staff were thrilled. This was the first of many successful projects. Over the next 5 years, Volta installed more than 400 renewable, powering everything from commercial rice and corn farm, rural health clinics. Um, the solutions weren't just about technology, they were about energy access and equity. Each system we installed meant longer clinic hours, safer childbirths, more students learning on computers, and more stable incomes for local farmers and producers. This was grassroots systems change, use problems at once. We were changing the lives of our customers, but the systems that we're creating, poverty we initially set out to address, they were massive global corporations. And over the years, my realization on that started to shift my thinking. And I started to think more and more that, like, if the world's like 1,000 or 5,000 biggest companies didn't fundamentally change how they operate, that, mines or even hundreds of small solar move the needle. And so I started to entertain the idea that, well, maybe I should try go working for, see if I could weasel some change. And so I did. I decided I would, go undercover to join the very companies I wrestle some change from the inside. Um, Worked. So this is the first one. After 5 years of startup life in West Africa, my first stop undercover, so to speak, was at Steelcase, which is this old school office for a major manufacturer. They've got dozens. And when I got there, the leadership was totally cold on sustainability. I was told that a previous leadership, it didn't work, and so they moved on. And in like week one, I realized like I wasn't starting at zero with these people. Like they thought this was a bad idea. But I'm stubborn and I saw opportunity. I looked at the competition and I realized that they were facing increasing sustainability competition from like IKEA and Herman Miller, who were both already positioning themselves when it comes to climate and sustainability. And it was clear to me that it didn't start moving behind. So with like carbon or waste reduction, I started to use their language. So I stopped saying things like, we need to reduce landfill waste and start increase material efficiency and protect our market. Instead of saying like, oh, we're hearing more renewable energy, talking about, let's reduce long-term energy costs. And that's when people started to listen. I think once I had built a little bit of credibility, I was able to build, coalitions around like with managers, and together we launched four very small circular economy pilots. First, a reuse program to keep furniture out of landfills, a remanufacture an old inventory into as new pieces. We designed a reverse logistics system for collecting and reusing old materials. And finally, a leasing program, which was like as a surface, kind of a rent, refresh their offices without. Um, each pilot was small, which is essentially a test in a single region. But together, we on cost savings and customer loyalty and data to build a business case. And it worked. Those four pilots have been scaled into what is circular by Steelcase initiative. And so what began as a few quiet experiments turned into a new operating model as a resource and sustainability. And so this was sort of the first place I learned kind of the essence of tempered. Really hadn't heard that term yet at the time. I think this was a good example of a way to drive change isn't always by shouting louder, and occasionally organization's own dialect. Um, so yeah, that's the first example. This is the second example I'll give, which is with DuPont. So after Steelcase, I wanted to test where this kind of change from within philosophy could stretch. And so DuPont, if you're unfamiliar, is one of the storied and problematic chemical companies in the world. For over 200 years, DuPont has invented some of the most iconic materials on the planet, like Kevlar, Tyvek, Freon, the list goes on and on and on. Old environmental legacies, um, worker illness cover-ups, contaminated rivers. There was a movie made in 2019 called Dark Waters with Mark Ruffalo. Fascinating story of a major lawsuit. So when I accepted an offer to join, Duke to me said, like, why do all places? And that was kind of the point. I wanted to see what sustainability looked like in the belly of the beast and start to understand so rooted in its ways. So I worked at their experimental station in Wilmington, Delaware. This is where many of those materials and chemicals were first invented. And I reported directly to the chief sustainability officer, who was a smart, trying to modernize old school company. And I walked the reality of institutional inertia. On paper, DuPont had strong commitments and glossy sustainability report. Behind the scenes, sustainability closer to closer to presence. I was tasked with creating a new internal metric that would quantify downstream benefit. We called it an innovation handprint, which is an LCA-based metric that's life cycle, a metric that would quantify positives. This is essentially print is the reduction of someone else's carbon footprint. This allows us to measure the benefit, maybe tell, in one case, sell more product. Um, I went in thinking that this would be appealing to the businesses. Like, why wouldn't you want to tell this story? You want to showcase your advances in sustainability and innovation. But ultimately ran into roadblock after roadblock. The owners and managers of these products value. This was totally frustrating, and not because the people didn't care, but because I realized I was an organization that was designed to protect its equilibrium. The same structures I think that once made our house now made it risk averse. There's a lesson here too, which is that sometimes the tempered radical path reaches a wall. You can't, won't, but you can learn where you're leveraged, and sometimes walking away is the tempered act. And so I did. And I certainly don't consider this sort of this experience, if anything, sharpened my sense of where the culture simply isn't ready yet. Um, I think it's important to lessen, and push there. Here's the last little mini case I'm going to share. Last year I joined Kraft in Chicago. Kraft Heinz is a national food company responsible for many brands that you may know. You may love them, you may hate foods, things like Jell-O, Kraft Kool-Aid, Heinz ketchup, Grey Poupon. I could go on for an hour. So I was hired as a sustainability for their procurement sustainability team. Procurement organizations is the group of people responsible for buying everything that they need to make their product. So think raw materials like milk, wheat, eggs, etc. And when I arrived, the procurement organization had a consistent way to engage their suppliers on sustainability issues. And there was this disconnect because the company, sort of the large corporate entity, was setting these climate targets, but the more sort of booth didn't really know what that meant. And so this is a 30 billion food company with 4,000 suppliers around the world, each at different stages of sustainability maturity. So these communication breakdowns that was happening all over the world. Uh, Really slick carbon accounting systems in place. Others didn't know what to go. My task was to design kind of a unified supplier engagement strategy that would work for all of the suppliers and help our buyers with both the climate targets. And it wasn't easy. The procurement teams in many organizations don't typically speak the language of sustainability. They speak risk and cost and contracts and rely. And so again, I had to sort of reframe my conversation and my outreach. This wasn't about being green. The buyers didn't really care. This was about being future proof. It was about them do their job a bit better. So we train buyer sustainability data and to weigh it alongside cost and risk, help them translate the climate language into business language. And once buyers and their bosses saw how sustainability metrics were linked to profitability and brand value, our little sustainability team had buy-in. And so embed more climate metrics into supplier scores. We helped them create tracking on performance and to the ones that were making real measurable progress. And so the results now is a living draft. This is a scalable, data-driven system that rolled out and is being rolled out to procurement teams around the world. And what we're seeing is like lower carbon packaging relationships. Um, Still kind of a long way to go before I'd call Kraft a climate champion, but it counts. Um, you know, this and sort of the other sort of mini case stories, each scale about language and timing. Um, the takeaway here is that change isn't linear. It's never perfect, and often messy and iterative, and always deeper. I think these lessons became, building blocks for my theory of change, which is that progress happens not just through bold ideas, but through persistence. Any questions there? Okay, so I'll move into sort of the last bit on the tempered radical here, which is a toolkit of how you can become a tempered radical. The first thing here is to know your non-negotiables. There are places and times in this world we line. For me, that's with oil and gas. I'll work with almost any company, but I won't work with fossil fuels, for example. Um, the second tool here is to identify your leverage points. Where can you create change? The places where you create effective change will likely be different than where I do. So this might be in data transfer, supply chain design, or team culture. Leverage the spots where your expertise meets opportunity. Number three, build quiet coalitions. Find your people, find the other weirdos, find the people they can't or aren't saying it out loud yet. Shift starts with a few people talking in the hallway. Four, reframe conversations. I gave a couple examples of how I've done that in the past, but learn the dominant right. Engineers care about precision, cares about risk. Executives care about growth. Translate your values and you'll find alignment. And sometimes you got to play the long game. Change inside system ones can be slow, but persistence pays off. Remember, every small win ripples outwards. The policies and the culture with which you're. So there's the quick, unofficial, tempered radical toolkit. And then, I'll move into just sort of a slightly related topic that I want to share here, which is a little bit of a zoomed out thing. Now we've reviewed some of the tools that Deb talked about, some of the strategies I've used for driving change, and I just want to zoom out and focus on listening to this talk right now because eventually you'll graduate and start to ask yourself what's next. And if you're like me, you may not know right away. I certainly didn't, and that's cool. If you're one of the many people out there searching or your purpose, direction, whatever you want to call it, this is one framework that has been helpful for me to visit from time to time. This is the concept of ikigai, which is a place where four things overlap: what you love, what you're good at, needs, and what you can be paid for. If you're driven by purpose, as I suspect many of you are, your challenge is not whether, it's how and where. Plot your place on this map. Um, maybe you'll be an activist, an entrepreneur, the next tempered radical, work in some major global company, and all are valid paths. The goal here isn't to pick, like the right integrity with your influence. Um, so as you think about your own career path, where do your skills and your purpose intersect? That's what this exercise is about. And, you know, you can interpret it and visit this as you please if it's helpful. And I'll sort of leave you with Meyerson's reminder, if 1,000 inch, you'll change the company. So there's just a quick plug for EQ. I'll leave you sort of with this quote here that is about radical really isn't about playing it safe. It's about playing it smart. It's about showing up fully with your values intact in systems that need the change, but that aren't already asking for it. So, whether you go on to start a company, whether you join an NGO or, work in government, remember that these institutions people do. And so when you step into those systems, bring courage, bring your empathy, bring your strategy, and the real change becomes possible. So, and um, if you enjoyed today's conversation, if you liked the tempered radical, if you liked the sort of flavor of activism, if you want to dig in further, this is a great place to continue. This is an awesome book called Changing Your Company from the Inside Out. It's where I stole the subtitle for my talk today, and a fantastic follow-up to Deborah's work. It's practical, it's story-driven, it's for people who care about purpose, but also want to understand the realities and challenges of institutions. So if you're interested, I can by PDF or you can order one wherever you buy books. But that's what I've got for you today. Thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure sharing this with you. I love fellow greeners, hearing about your work, so feel free to reach out anytime. We have a few minutes for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Eli. Let's take a moment, applause or unmute. The long start to the lecture series. I so appreciate it. And I'm going to open the floor for questions. Feel free to put them in the chat. If you'd like to raise your hand, we can call on people. I'll also, after I ask my first question, I'll put some questions students before this lecture. Uh, and while we're waiting for people to sort of submit their questions, and I encourage my students, their questions they submitted through Canvas, please submit them through. My first question, Eli, is it's a hard time to be in this field space. And on top of, the anxiety and the of the climate crisis, how do you yourself navigating the personal burden of this work in where we find ourselves in this world, preventing burnout, of helplessness?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great possible to entirely prevent burnout. I think there are good days at work or what you do. Um, I think that overall, the bigger picture, climate and sustainability work feels important to me. On a great day, we're making change. On a terrible day, my faith still feels important, right? And I guess it sort of gets back to the idea that you kind of have to do something. And I'd rather be working on big problems where even though the pace of change is frustratingly slow, I still would rather be a part of a wave of positivity in this world, which, sort of negativity as well. So, I think that's sort of a long-winded version of some of my own internal mantra thinking of, just keep pushing. This is part of something important, something bigger than me that so, most days it's exciting to be working on it. And
Thank you. I have a list of questions that I'm just gonna start going through unless there's someone who would like to speak their
sure.
question.
Putting them in the chat, Tamsin. Mm. Oh, there's one in the chat. I'll read it. How do you keep your sense of purpose of slow change?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where persistence is important. I think I'm fairly grounded in my purpose and know that most people don't share it, right? We could probably have a long conversation on this call of like why it matters, the moral argument, conservation argument. There's plenty of that stuff that we as greeners get without having to share much. Most of the world doesn't share that. And so I don't expect people to jump right in and be like, dude, like we are climate. That doesn't happen often. And so I think the tempered radical ethos is important to bring with you if you're going to go to a place where there isn't mass alignment on this, that my job there isn't to create some overnight, wave of activism. It takes time. It takes time to sort of observe the social network and realize like who are the leaders here? Like, oh, maybe people really look up to Paige. And if Paige and I can really connect on a few ideas, then Paige will workshop this to some of our other colleagues. And sometimes these movements are slow to build. They often are. But yeah, part of my purpose is to sort of like be that little sort of squeaky engine inside of places and, when things at the problem.
Thank you. Okay, so has the fear or uncertainty of losing your job sustainability?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we can be honest here that like Um, sustainability is kind of going through a bloodbath this year. That many of my colleagues are out of work for weeks to months at a time on this. And while those moments are, yeah, scary or frustrating and uncertain, I think that there's sort of a spectrum of sort of fear that we're willing to tolerate. Some people have no tolerance or sort of bandwidth for that, and they'll just say, you know what, love sustainability, but I'm going to XYZ and just bring my own views to a non-sustainability job or a non-directly sustainability job. I'm a little bit closer to the other side of the spectrum where I will happily shuttle a few months out of work if it means my next job is a little closer to what I want to be doing, which is direct sustainability work. Many colleagues are you know, undercover at like, Nestle or, without sustainability or anything like that in the title, sort of doing this work quietly. And so, there's sort of this cheesy mantra that's like totally true, unfortunately, is a sustainability job. And so, whether you're someone who chases a certain job title or a certain industry, or you're someone that's just like, dude, it's not obviously environmentally related. Like, we're all right. Like, there are no wrong paths here. So, um, sometimes it just takes a little while to sort of workshop how it fits in with your values and how you bring those to work or loudly or, whatever is appropriate.
Okay, well then I'll ask my question before I ask the next one because it's kind of related. I'm curious when you got hired at Steelcase, this company that you described as kind of starting from -0, what did they hire you as and change at all throughout your time there?
Yes. So this started out as a kind of a consultant that evolved into a full-time gig. I think I was working on the carbon strategy team, which initially started out as more of like a reporting role. A lot of large organizations have to comply with sustainability reporting, which is similar to their financial reporting. It's more on sort of waste, water, energy, and those things. Evolved from a, yeah, kind of reporting admin work to much more strategic and creative in that I was tasked to design and implement those four as I talked about earlier, which was much, which was around demonstrating the sustainability, profitability of circular pilots. Uh, Basically making the case that like we are throwing away an enormous amount of material that we should be recovering, so we don't have to buy it all new. And that type of thinking is
Okay, the next question, I'll just preface, I know you already shared some good memories from early on in your career, but what are some other favorite memories from early on and have really helped you keep moving forward? Maybe some small wins or big wins.
Yeah, I mean, like maybe this is clear from my little timeline, but I've had a pretty non-linear career path, right? Like I didn't go to one place and then get a promotion and then get a promotion and stay in my industry. I've kind of been all over the place. And so I think the advice, the small win is just like embracing trial. And there are a few things that aren't on the timeline I shared today that yeah, like I can admit they were kind of flops or failures, but just like you try something and like this doesn't feel like me. Especially with the first few jobs, like after Evergreen, like some of them sucked. Like just bad, not that they were bad jobs, that they weren't the right fit for me. And so like one of them, I worked as a policy analyst in Silicon Valley, working with, it was like 400 member companies around why environmental policy matters to them and on top good entry level role, but it just felt boring, right? Like every day was kind of the same. And so I think the small win is for me was quitting that job and starting Volta, right? That another sort of goofy cliche is like one door closes, another one opens. And I think there's something to be said for being open to things and leave room for what comes next, which many cases you can't see around the bend, but a lot of times something really cool is waiting for you there. And in my case, I ended up going to
Thank you. What is the hard you've had to accept in order for your values?
America. I mean, yeah, I don't love the idea of corporate America any more today than I did 15 years ago when I've just learned to, I don't know, fit in a little bit better. That still feels like a huge compromise, despite having a few roles, sort of like very sort of under the hood look at some solutions that I think are most problematic in the world. At the same time, I don't think these institutions are going to get better by themselves. They almost always do not. And without, people like me and people like us who are dedicated to bringing facility expertise into the places that need it most, we definitely won't see the change that we'd like to see. So, that was sort of a hard pill to swallow and a compromise make inside of my own head before I like apply for it. It's still a little weird, but once you realize that, some of this change will, I think it, definitely push through.
Another question, what leadership qualities can be employed most effectively?
Great. The first, active listening, of listening that needs to happen before make meaningful change. Humility is important, especially like not coming from some background. There was a lot I had to learn before I realized like, how does this place work? Like, who's in charge? How do policies change? Partners. So I think a lot of yeah, listening and learning before you have the confidence and credibility to take your ideas and workshop them in a way that actually hear, resonate with, and be like, you know what? This is a cool idea. Let's run with it and give it a try. So, those are a couple, and, both kind of soft skills, the ones I mentioned, but, you'll find plenty important.
I have one question to ask before this next one in the chat. I'm curious, do you ever see yourself working in the future for a company that is really great at sustainability, like Patagonia or like IKEA or like one of those climate champions that you mentioned? Like, what do you think be like for you? Do you
Totally. I think feel really nice to be in a place where we all agreed, where we all kind of get it. I think in those situations, you like imagine the trade-off of like satisfaction and low personal impact, right? Like I'm at a company that's doing a lot of good, versus going to a company where you don't have that type of consensus, where maybe, one unit of translate to a much bigger impact at the organization. And so there's no wrong way to go to work, right? Like the world needs IKEAs and Patagonias. We need Spear, the innovators, the trendsetters, sort of the mic drops. The world also needs like whatever's at the other end of the spear, not the tip of the spear, like the come on, guys, into the future, but there's a better way to do this. And um, the world needs every single point along that spear, one that feels compelled to kind of go to the other end, right? And, over the years, like your thinking evolves, right? I've definitely had conversations with people that work at more tip of the spear companies, and I'm like, man, that sounds nice, right? Like it's less of an uphill battle. People get it. Initiatives are much easier to sort of get on because, like, that's the culture, that's the ethos. So, you know, everyone sort of needs to do a little bit of soul searching or fill out that Ikigai form. Where do my values and my acts all the right answer?
yeah. Okay, so what is one innovation that you're most excited?
Hmm. I think, tell me if this is a cop-out answer, because it's not specifically an innovation, but I think just in the last few years, there's been a substantial social shift in change and willingness to talk about not as if it's a real problem, but it because it's a real problem. That for so long there was kind of this like debate around climate change. And like that still exists like in the murmurs and like weird shadows. Vast majority of people are like they kind of get it now. And that's, I think, driven unfortunate reality that we've been to face it. That this is no longer some that happens over there. That enough people in the world and enough people in the United States have been affected by a flood or a fire or something that didn't happen when they were growing up, that the conditions have worsened. And so I think that that's an unfortunate but important mindset shift, to getting this work done at the scale needed so that the next generation
I
doesn't.
love that.
I see one more question. How do you decide which companies and or positions to apply for in order to
I have, it's interesting. So I don't have like an industry that I've worked in, right? Like my whole career isn't like in food or aviation or transportation. And so I think the blessing, which means um, potentially more opportunity, but it's harder because I'm always learning a new industry, right? Which is something that I brought upon myself. But I think in the long run, add then vocabulary around how the world works. But when it comes to job hunting, I just wrapped very recently. I accepted an offer in agroecology, which is new to me. I'm going into waste management. The world throws away less stuff, no stuff. Um, I think, when I put on my like job hunting hat and it's time to apply for jobs, I try to sort of play it out in my head of like, okay, if I got this and I was able to do everything in the job that I would be happy to see. Um, if the answer is yeah, for me to write a cover letter and put in an application. If I find myself sort of in that like, 30 to 60-second thought experiment, like unable to see the end, or I don't really know enough of anyone to call to ask, maybe this goes on to the B list next week. So, I try to prioritize based on, I don't know, a gut check first to see, is this something that go from there?
I feel like we should have you again for another lecture on how to look for a job. Because I
That's a
don't think
whole
I've
nother
ever
story.
listened to job
I'm,
advice like that. Yeah.
yes,
Insane.
All right. Well, we're at time, Eli, so I want to respect your time. If we could just take a moment, everyone, all participants, either with the emojis or in the chat, just a note of gratitude. What a strong start to our lecture series. Eli, thank you so, so much for joining us. What a relevant topic as well. Thank you so, so, so much. And we look forward to seeing you for our lecture next week. Eli, thank you so much again.
absolutely. Thanks for having me.